Hello and welcome to Thursdays for the Soul. My name is Jennifer White and I am your host for today. Thursdays for the Soul is a webinar series for the whole church, where we faithfully focus on education for the people of God and create opportunities to digitally worship together as the whole of the United Church of Christ. From prayer, music, and psalms to interviews of key leaders and how-tos in congregational life, this series stays current to the relevant topics of the time and offers opportunities of connection in the wider church and in your community. Because together, we can bring our church in the world towards the world God imagined for all of us. So let me tell you what's coming up. Next week is Thanksgiving. We will not have a session, but I encourage you to watch one of our sessions on Doctrine of Discovery and share with your friends while you share a meal. Thursday, December 1st, we will have World AIDS Day prayer and remembrance. In 1988, December 1st was declared to be World AIDS Day, a day to remember those living with HIV and AIDS, honor those who have died, and to raise awareness around prevention and testing globally. Globally, there are more than 37 million people living with the disease, while another 40 million have died since the first diagnosis in 1981. Though there have been great strides in treatment, the HIV/AIDS still claims an estimated 2 million lives a day, which is more than 250,000 are children. Please join UCC and ecumenical leaders as Thursdays for the Soul presents World AIDS Day prayer and remembrance. December 15th, we will have WISE, which is welcoming, inclusive, supportive, and engaged for mental health. The United Church of Christ adopted WISE for mental health covenant as a denomination in 2015 as part of our commitment to mental health justice. Join representatives of the UCC Mental Health Network for practical resources for what UCC members and congregations can do to become a WISE congregation. December 22nd, we will have Near the Brokenhearted. The Christmas season is primarily known for hope and joy, focus on community and familial gatherings of celebration and Thanksgiving. However, for some, the winter holiday season may be difficult due to personal loss and grief. Please join us for a special Christmas service in which we acknowledge pain and mourning during the holiday season, which uplifts prayers for hope, peace, and affirmation that God is near the brokenhearted and saves the crushed of spirit. As usual, you can visit ucc.org or any of our social media platforms to find out sessions just like these. Friends, my beloveds, if these conversations move you, if what's offered here today helps you enhance your ministry or even your soul, please consider donating towards the annual fund of the United Church of Christ. You can do that by texting UCC to 41444. Your prayerful support helps programs just like this in the essential work of the United Church of Christ. I thank you for all that you do. Today's session is Becoming a Creation Justice Church. This webinar is part of a special series of Thursdays for the Soul, where we focus on 12 of Just World Covenant programs in the United Church of Christ. And we do this on the third Thursday of the month. Creation Justice Churches is a program of the United Church of Christ that guides congregations in discerning how they can best embody commitment to care for God's creation. As Christians, this is our first calling in the Bible. It is also a calling that has been integral to the DNA of the UCC as a denomination and as the historic role played in the UCC's Commission for Racial Justice in launching the environmental justice movement. In the face of climate crisis, the Creation Justice Church program has provided a path of active hope for a growing number of congregations. At the UCC's Minister for Environmental Justice, I introduce you, my dear friends, to Reverend Dr. Brooks Berndt. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Jennifer, for that introduction, and great to be with everybody in this digital space. I'm excited about this presentation today. We're going to hear from four wonderful people who have been leaders in their congregations and going through the Creation Justice Church process. Before we hear from those four individuals, I first just want to kind of talk about the nuts and bolts of what the Creation Justice Church program is all about, so that we're all on the same page. And this is really, you can, if you haven't seen, there's a web page devoted to the 5 steps that take one through what it takes to be a Creation Justice Church. As Jennifer just said, our first calling, the first job that God gives us in the Bible, in the book of Genesis, is to care for God's creation. And so this program is really all about how do we respond to that call. It's a process of discernment, and really the program centers around 4 areas of discernment. The application has 4 sets of questions for each of these areas of discernment. And so what are these areas of discernment? First, there is theology and worship. If you think about the question that we're asking, how do we respond to this call from God to care for God's creation? It's a theological question. And then, importantly, how do we see that reflected when we gather as a community, when we come together for worship, when we sing and when we pray and when we preach? How is that reflected in what we do on Sunday morning and throughout the rest of the week? And so theology and worship are foundational for this program. The second area of discernment, institutional life and practice. This is about how we walk the talk. If you think about it, there is no committee or ministry in the life of the church that cannot in some way relate to this question of how do we care for God's creation and what we're doing. That could be education programs for children. It could be where a church banks its money or invests its money. All of these things really connect to our commitment to care for God's creation. So inviting people into that process of thinking about that and how they engage that in their ministries in the church. A third area of discernment is what we call circles of awareness and advocacy. This is something that really leans into what Jennifer talked about. We're the denomination that was really at the heart of launching the environmental justice movement with its concern for environmental racism and how when you harm the environment, you're also harming the poor most often. And so that is something that we try to live into as we think about kind of the church is at the heart of expanding circles, concentric circles. And so we ask questions like, well, where do we get that energy that puts on the light bulbs in our church? And is anybody harmed in the process of creating that energy? And what can we do to change that situation? Those are all important questions to be asking in going through this process. A fourth area of discernment then is about connecting to a broader movement. When we face enormous critical issues today, like the climate crisis, we'll find that it's easy to lose energy and to lose steam if we're not connected with others in dealing with some of these enormous challenges today. So it's really vital to how we sustain ourselves and how we get the best of ideas by connecting with others, seeing what they're doing, what their best practices, what their sources of inspiration are. And so these are all 4 areas of discernment, so that by the end of this process, one will be able to submit an application and say, we have really intentionally and thoughtfully thought about how we live into all of these areas of discernment. And so a big question can be like, how do we do that? And so for every area of discernment, there is a resource page that presents 5 ideas for what a church can do. And we very much encourage churches to come up with their own ideas. Come up with your way of discerning what God is calling your congregation to do. In addition to having those resources, then one can also think about kind of what's your strategy for going through this process of discernment. And here a church might say, we'll split the next year into 4 quarters. And every quarter we will address one of these areas of discernment. So maybe in the first quarter, we're going to launch things with an Earth Sunday celebration. And we're going to follow that up with a potluck, which everybody is invited, and we're going to have locally sourced organic food. And we're going to have table conversations where people respond to this idea of creation justice and what it could mean for our congregation. And then every quarter, you make sure you have some event that generates energy and momentum and passion within your congregation, so that by the end of the year, you can say, yes, we have really covered our bases and lived into this. So we're going to hear in a moment from churches who have been through this process and have done exceptionally well in doing that. One final thing I do want to say before we hear from these important voices is that this is a program that is for really any congregation, no matter where they are on the journey. So if your church is new to this idea of caring for God's creation as a top priority for what it means to be a Christian, great. This is a terrific program for you. If your congregation has maybe done a great job in living into 2 or 3 of the areas of discernment, but you've got a bit of a growing edge when it comes to maybe advocacy. You've done the energy efficiency audits and everything, but maybe got a little bit of room for growth for what you can do to kind of advocate for a more just world. And this is a program for you. If your church has been excelling in all 4 areas for more than 20 years, my belief is, and what I have seen from churches that have done this, is that there is no church that goes through this process and doesn't find room to envision more room to grow, more room to really live into what it means to answer this calling. Because ultimately, this calling is something that we're always discerning. It doesn't end. It's an ongoing journey. And so every church, no matter where they're at on that journey, this is really a program that is meant for you to kind of coalesce and bring a way of affirming what's been done and envisioning what can be done. So with that said, I'd really like to turn things to our stars for today. I'll introduce them to you and the churches they come from, and then we'll engage each one of them. Up first, we're going to hear from Barbara Smith-Bacon from First Congregational United Church of Christ in Sarasota, Florida. Next, we'll hear from the Reverend Robert Graybill from Church of Christ at Dartmouth College. Then we'll have the Reverend Nancy Leckerling from First Congregational Church in Guilford, Connecticut. And then finally, we have Claire Stiles from Lakewood United Church of Christ in St. Petersburg, Florida. Barbara, let me turn to you first. Your congregation went through the Creation Justice Church process in a way that was very thoughtful, organized, participatory. Can you tell us about the process that was implemented to guide the congregation into becoming a Creation Justice Church?
Absolutely, Brooks. And hello, everyone. So excited to have you here today. By way of background, our First Congregational UCC Church in Sarasota has about 430 members, largely retirees, families, snowbirds. We had done, as Brooks was talking about, some of the low-hanging fruit. We had addressed replacing obsolete equipment with more energy-efficient models, slowly converting lights to LED, recycling. However, we saw no collective coherence in those actions, and no one was connecting the dots between those actions and God's biblical creation. The UCC was honoring love of creation. We felt it was time to amp it up. Our green team was reformed in 2018 and initially focused on educating our congregation while integrating the larger community. We organized panel presentations on religion and the environment with other churches, synagogues, and the mosque, alerted church members to community sustainable workshops, beach and park cleanups, wrote educational newsletter articles, hosted book studies, organized spiritual nature walks, visited local organic farms. But as 2018 continued, we found ourselves knee-deep into 17 months of devastating toxic red tide algal blooms, which grew to 1,000 times the lethal concentration for fish and wildlife, and greatly spiked asthma in humans. 2,400 tons of dead marine life was cleaned from local beaches and bay waters. So God's beautiful creation was being destroyed on our doorstep. We felt this had to be front and center with our congregation. As Brooks has mentioned, we went to the UCC website, and we hope all of you do who haven't already done that. We read the guidelines and we talked about them on the Green Team. We kind of looked at each other and said, how do we do this? How do we process these steps? Because we hadn't taken any really formal steps. Recognizing that each church's creation justice journey is unique, we reached out to the Lakewood UCC Church. Claire Stiles is here today. We asked for copies, thank you, Claire. We asked for copies of their creation justice covenant and application, which they supplied. They were at that point the only Florida church which was designated as a creation justice church. And honestly, just seeing what another church had done helped to crystallize our thinking, our focus. It made the process seem doable. So the process, for us, it had to be open and transparent. The UCC allows the covenant to vote to be by the full congregation or just the church leadership. Brooks, I think that's still the case, just the governing body. We knew the vote had to be our entire congregation. The Green Team wasn't going to dictate a result to a disengaged congregation. So we used a multi-step, I would say, ripple effect or top-down discernment process by engaging church leadership, our most involved members, the full congregation, and we used all of our communication and discussion resources. First, we met with our minister for his support and guidance. It is, after all, creation justice, and there is a lot that's going into worship, prayer, Bible study, capital decisions, and more. Thankfully, Pastor Wes was and is all in with abundance. Next, we sought approval from our church leadership team, our council, composed of largely the heads of our teams or committees, it may be in your church. We explained what we were doing. We presented a 2-page summary. It went into the what, the why, and the how. What is a creation justice church? Why should we become a creation justice church? And how did we plan to do it? Dates, action items, interim reports to council, final report, and a hopeful goal for a vote. At that meeting with leadership, we received approval to move forward and a direction for each team to meet with our Green Team to learn more and discuss our goal. And from there, our exploration flowed outward. We met with each team. We explained the what and the why. We took comments on the spot. We left behind a 1-page summary. And most importantly, I think we left behind 4 questions. They were for more thoughtful feedback about how this goal related both to the group's work or the team's work specifically, as well as to their individual lives. We did the same thing with our long-standing church groups, UCC Women, Men's Breakfast, Collage, Bible study, choir, youth, and requested those questions be answered or people contact us. We simultaneously were reaching out to the full congregation. We spoke in church. We put information in our newsletter. We explained the what and the why, and we provided information in our midweek message. We hosted an after-church PowerPoint at community hour before COVID struck, and had a question and answer session, a discussion. We engaged our congregation by formulating a slogan for our church, and the winning one was, living green with God's creation. Copies of the 4 questions were available to everyone digitally at community hour, in the narthex. There was a lot of dialogue, even continuing during COVID. as we provided at-home resources for guided reading, documentaries like Kiss the Ground, self-guided nature walks, all with Zoom follow-up discussions, or sitting outside and talking to each other. We all remember that. Thinking and speaking. So most importantly, we requested and received all of that input. And we consolidated all of those answers into one robust document that demonstrated what was important to our congregation, how each team or group expected to wrap that creation justice into their work, and what more our individuals in our congregation would like to be done or to learn about or to do. We shared this with leadership, and it literally drove the content of our creation justice application and covenant, as well as an action checklist for our church and our green team's next steps for articles, presentations, and the like. Finally, every single member in our congregation had a chance to review and comment on our covenant, on the wording, the grammar, the punctuation, via all those same resources. COVID, I would say, slowed us down 4 to 5 months. But with our newfound Zoom proficiency, our covenant was unanimously approved at our virtual January 2021 annual meeting, and we were designated in March of 2021. So is creation justice now part of our DNA? It is. You know, we're still learning and growing. There's a lot more to do. But in a flyer for last weekend's conference at church, attendees were reminded to bring their own water bottles to avoid unnecessary plastic use. And this isn't us saying this. This is fellowship. Facilities and grounds who really didn't really want much to do with us had now consults they want to know about environmentally sensitive labyrinth cleaning materials, weed deterrents, lawn products. We're moving toward native plantings. We finally got all that lighting upgraded to LED. We speak to our new member prospects about our 3 covenants. And our finance team, who in 2020 did not want to hear about us asking for money, actually gave budgets to our 3 covenant groups and for 2022. So our process journey, our discernment process ended, but our creation justice journey is, I think, really starting. It's really ongoing, and we're excited about it. And there's so much more to do. So there should be some resources made available to you. I hope it's been helpful. Thank you so much. Brooks?
Thank you so much, Barbara. I'm excited just hearing about all that you were able to accomplish and continue to accomplish at your church. Thank you for sharing. Rob, you engaged this process as one of the clergy leaders in your church. You know the ins and outs of thinking about theology and worship in relationship to creation justice, and you and your congregation also possess a real strength when it comes to involving youth in creation justice ministries. Can you tell us about some of your experiences with the Creation Justice Church's process and the unique ways in which your congregation has lived out what it means to be a Creation Justice Church?
Absolutely, Brooks, thank you. And greetings from slightly snowy New Hampshire. And I was struck listening to Barbara about the congruence of the process and how if you go through this Creation Justice Church process, you develop common ground with so many other faith communities. And I was marveling at that. So I will try not to repeat processes that were nevertheless very important to us, such as the covenant writing. I will touch on that in a bit. But Brooks, you're absolutely right that theology is a component part and can be an energizing part of this because of the clear scriptural warrant that is there. Sometimes entities will use Bible quotes and they'll proof text out something to agree with them, but the breadth of the scriptural warrant, starting with Genesis and our charge as stewardship, and starting with the Psalms that say the earth is God's, and then starting with some of the scolding scriptures that say, oh dear, as in Isaiah, look what you've done with the planet. And if you incorporate climate justice preaching and climate justice liturgy on a regular basis. It helps sustain. I loved what Barbara said. Our journey is just getting started. And there are so many good ways to remind folks of the journey they're on, right there in the liturgy, in the increased attention we see on the season of creation, ending with the Feast of St. Francis, which is also a good youth entry. Brooks, I want to talk about how our individual church, and we have the distinction of being the second church in New Hampshire that became a Creation Justice church, and immediately set out on a charge to find and inspire the third. And we're thrilled that now is happening in several ways. But our help also came from the New Hampshire Conference and from the national setting of the UCC. And we actually had a recent event that talks a little bit to your question about youth empowerment. There were 2 or 3 students 2 years ago who were part of our covenant writing process, who stepped forward, one a recent college grad, one barely a 9th grader in high school, and one who was actually just entering middle school. And they became part of the process, and that sustained their interest. And we would recommend to all churches who are considering the Creation Justice Church process, one of the outgrowths will be an increased interest and involvement of youth and young people. If your church is doing things that are relevant to them, and if they are some of the best ones to point out to us the intersection between climate justice and racial justice, you have something going on in your church that makes it more attractive to young people and young adults, and at the same time gives them opportunities for involvement. Brooks, I want to talk, if I can, about something that you're well familiar with, the Creation Justice grants that were given by the Creation Justice Council of the UCC this past summer. And they accepted 3 grant proposals for institutions, 2 churches, and a summer camp to involve themselves and involve young people in particular, high school and college age students in environmental justice projects. And I think that's the kind of thing that the students in our congregation really resonated with. So I think climate is something that kids are probably more well developed on than we might even give them credit for. They know a lot, and they care a lot, and they feel a lot. And one of the default emotions that young people have is anger that can be resolved or can be unresolved, and even in some cases grief. Teenagers, college students, we've seen Oxford surveys that describe this. And yet, if you're involved in the struggle, if you're involved in the dialogue, that is a source of climate hope. And Brooks, I've seen that based on another program that I would commend to all churches, and that's the Climate Hope Art Contest that Andy Wells Bean is running. It's really a superlative way to involve young people in a medium that suits them. Being creative is something that appeals to all ages, and we've seen this in several congregations that I'm familiar with. I'm nearing the end of my discourse. I'm going to try to be succinct, said no pastor with an open mic ever. But we were told by Jennifer and by Brooks that there'd be a reasonable audience for this webcast and for this YouTube presentation. In the last 6 months, I visited 5 different churches as a salesperson for the Creation Justice Church program. And so all of you out there, I have just submitted a sabbatical proposal that would provide funding for travel and a substitute for me, and I can go on the road and preach in your church, wherever, about creation justice, about the intersection of scripture and theology. One more thing about liturgy before I go, and that is the idea that nonviolent direct action can be a liturgical practice. And that's something for, as we talk about the 4 areas of discernment, one of them talks about going beyond what can we do within our walls as a church. How can we represent in the marketplace the idea that saving creation is something for all faiths, all communities. That's the kind of coalition building and common ground that a strong involvement. And that is also something that resonates with young people. Young people tend to be much more attuned to the idea of working on something with other faith groups and with groups that express their spirituality. And that provides, and this is my closing point at this time of year, the opportunity to learn from and ally with First Peoples and Indigenous peoples, because their take on the spirituality of stewardship and care for creation is one that informs ours, and it gives us some extraordinary allies. I saw in the chat there was a question about the doctrine of discovery. There are a number of ways that our youth right now are being engaged, learning about the doctrine of discovery. There will be more than 55 young people on Saturday listening to a keynote at a youth climate justice conference, co-sponsored by Southern New England and the New Hampshire Conference. And the conference minister, the Reverend Gordon Rankin, is keynoting a discussion of doctrine of discovery and linking it with his experience at Wounded Knee. And Brooks, that gives me a chance as I sign off to thank you for coming to our very first pre-COVID youth climate justice gathering. And so we're thrilled that our third virtual one is off the ground tonight, actually, and doing so well. Thanks to this panel, and Brooks, thanks to all that the UCC does at all levels to make growth in climate justice possible.
Thank you, Rob. You have truly been an awesome ambassador for the Creation Justice Church's program. So thank you again for all that you do and for sharing with us today. We'll turn now to Nancy. Nancy, you are ordained as a clergy member as well, but you have engaged this program as a lay member of your church and as the co-chair for your church's environmental justice ministry. In multiple ways, your congregation has been very intentional about how it has created and fostered important relationships in becoming a creation justice church. Can you tell us about some of the energizing connections and collaborations your congregation has experienced?
Thank you, Brooks. I'd love to do that. And I would like to thank you for the opportunity to participate in this panel with fellow UCC creation care and justice advocates. I'm honored to be part of our wonderful denomination, the United Church of Christ, with its peace and justice orientation, and to be with you all today. One of my favorite quotes is by Margaret Mead, where she said, "Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. The only thing that ever has." Indeed. This quote inspired my husband, John, and me to form an environmental ministry team at our church 6 years ago. Subsequently, in my talk, I will say EMT instead of environmental ministry team every time. It's a mouthful. The first 2 years, while 10 of us were getting to know each other and to coalesce as a team, we focused our energies on creating an organic garden out of a lawn behind the parsonage next door to our church. Next, we tackled retrofitting projects, including the installation of 74 solar panels on our 1955 church education building. These panels were designed to produce 100% of the facility's historical energy usage. And indeed they have, and they've produced even more energy than that. Our team had been following the former United Church of Christ Connecticut Conference Green Church checklist, which is a one-page environmental list of actions, which we completed. And then our church was named a level 3 congregation by the Connecticut Conference. And also at that time, we started checking the UCC website and all that was offered by the Environmental Justice Ministries page, which Brooks oversees. We started reading Brooks's pollinator blog and became curious about becoming a creation justice church in 6 steps. Our team agreed that this would be a worthy project to begin, and since we had already completed step 1, forming a green team, we jumped right to step 2, discerning and implementing ways to grow green. And we specifically focused on ways to expand our circles of awareness and advocacy and connections to a broader movement, because we felt a need to connect with other UCC churches and with interfaith and secular partners as well, to learn about environmental advocacy and to engage in environmental justice action. So our church joined the Interreligious Eco Justice Network. It's known as IREJN, also known now as Connecticut Interfaith Power and Light. And it's the only Connecticut nonprofit interreligious organization focused on the environment. Our EMT worked through IREJN's Greenhouse of Worship program and achieved level 3 in that program as well. And our church began to support IREJN financially, and church members took advantage of IREJN's educational programs to learn about environmental justice issues at the local and state and national levels. And then we participated in IREJN's advocacy opportunities, which was new for our church. I became a board member of IREJN 2 years ago and today co-chair that board. And also, many of our members decided to attend 350.org meetings and Connecticut League of Conservation voters meetings once we had speakers from these groups come, and to take part in their actions at our state capitol. After our EMT was 3 years old, the various historically strong justice committees of our church got our members together to look at the intersectionality of the injustices: economic, racial, social, and environmental. These 4 committees had sort of been in what I would call silos, with little direct communication about what we each were doing. So we combined all of these justice and witness groups, which had focused on immigration and peace and being an open and affirming congregation, creation justice, and outreach to missions. We combined them all into one board, and we named it the Board of Community and Global Concerns and Justice. Now we have representatives from the 4 groups meet together quarterly to share what initiatives we're involved in. And the benefit is a cross-pollination of ideas, as well as support for each other's areas of witness and advocacy. The respective groups continue to meet separately as needed to plan their specific actions, but consolidating these 4 committees provided for increased visibility in our congregation and at our church council meetings, and it consolidated the budgetary resources of our groups and allowed for a fusion of social justice, charitable outreach, and environmental activism. Before the COVID pandemic, we invited the local Shoreline Indivisible chapter to meet in our fellowship hall, where they met monthly for 4 years. 3 members of our EMT joined Indivisible's Environment Committee, and we participated in their Get Out the Vote initiatives and in successful actions to ban single-use plastic bags and fracking waste in our town and the next town. In another expansion of our connection to a broader movement, in the fall of 2020, my husband and I were asked to join the Southern New England Conference Environmental Ministry team. And this has been a wonderful experience of working with a group of passionate creation care and justice advocates from Connecticut, Massachusetts, and Rhode Island. I joined a subcommittee of this team to update the former Connecticut Conference Green Church one-page program, and we expanded that into a 4-level program called the Green Congregation Challenge, known as the GCC. The GCC includes more emphasis on the intersectionality of justices and more options for churches to tailor make and their own Green Church program with activities that are interesting to them and feasible for their congregations to do. It's an expanded program which creates a balance of retrofitting and creation care and creation justice advocacy and wider circles of community building activities in which houses of worship can engage. There are myriad resources connected to the GCC, and these are all linked to the various options that are in the program. And you can all access all of this at this SNE UCC conference website under the heading Green Congregation Challenge, and you'll receive that link in a follow-up email from Jennifer, as well as a list of books which have inspired and undergirded our church's EMT's work. Our church is now working on level 4 of the expanded program, and I'm shepherding 2 other Connecticut UCC congregations as they move through the levels of the GCC. Last spring, 2 other IREJN board members and I worked to adapt the Green Congregation Challenge for use by houses of worship of other faiths, and the new IREJN House of Worship program is up and running on their website. I really enjoy the interfaith aspect of this group, which brings me in contact with people of other faiths, and it's wonderful to see that we share the same goals about care of creation and care of creation justice. I also cherish the wider group or church group of our strong Southern New England EMT, and both of these groups fill us with hope and courage and purpose as we do advocacy together. We have the luxury of our state Senator Christine Cohen being a member of our church, and each year I give her my environmental wish list before the legislative session begins. Our team invites her to come to speak at our church each autumn about her work as the co-chair of the Connecticut Legislature's Environment Committee. And so church members can share with Christine what environmental legislation they'd like to see enacted. Our experience has been that Christine and our other legislatures really want to hear what's important to us. Our EMT travels to our state capital to support environmental bills on public lobby and advocacy days as part of the secular and faith-based groups in which we participate. We applied in winter of 2021 to become a UCC designated Creation Justice Church. And we're delighted to hear the news from Brooks in April of 2021 that our application was accepted and confirmed, and we became a Creation Justice Church. It was important for our EMT members to be engaged individually in creation care and also engaged with our team, but it was these energizing collaborations we've had and continue to have with groups outside of our church, which have helped us move from one level to the next and brought us into new and important relationships with others who love creation and are working for creation justice. Our church garden has been enlarged twice after we built raised beds and a composter 6 years ago. And each summer we donate about 180 pounds of produce to local food banks. We now have a pollinator flower garden started by another little group of church members who've registered our garden on the local pollinator pathway. And from time to time, we have groups and lunches and dinners in the garden, and we bring our church school youth out to plant and to harvest. But the best part of the garden is the fellowship and friendship the garden spawned, especially during COVID when we couldn't be inside together. Friendships formed among people who barely knew each other but loved gardening and who became friends as they worked side by side in our garden. And we in our EMT are so grateful for the new friends we've made by being part of IREJN, part of the Southern New England Conference EMT, and the wider UCC. We just had our first in-person retreat with the Southern New England EMT last Saturday in Rhode Island. What a joy it was to be with these, whom I call fast friends in faith, and to build on the bond that we've formed online these past 2 years. And in June, my husband and I attended the Poor People's March in Washington, D.C., and we marched and we worshiped with brothers and sisters in faith from the Washington, D.C. United Church of Christ. And that was a meaningful weekend of fellowship and environmental justice advocacy as well. These Creation Justice Church concentric circles of awareness and engagement and friendship, both in our congregation and with a broader movement, have kept our church's EMT alive, kept our congregation grounded in creation care and justice, and each of us passionately engaged these past 6 years in this important work. Our church is grateful for the UCC's Creation Justice Church program because it's helped our church grow in awareness, fellowship, and faith. I can't close without thanking Brooks for all of the ways that he's encouraged us and modeled the living out of his faith as he cares for the environment. He's fed our souls through the pollinator, through his monthly webinars, his book Cathedral on Fire, and his presence with us UCC folks when we bring our faith to the public square in marches in Washington, D.C. We so appreciate your inspiring ministry to and among us, Brooks. And thank you to you all online for sharing with us today. Brooks and both Brooks and Bob have talked about the New England Environmental Justice Youth Conference, and I want to agree with them and say this conference I've attended every year. It's an amazing conference. It's tonight. It starts at 7 to 9 and Saturday from 9 to 12. But the lineup of speakers is incredible, and so I hope you all will tune in for that as well.
Michael Malcolm keynote tonight.
Thank you so much, everybody, for listening.
Thank you so much, Nancy. It's really impressive all the different ways that your church has cultivated and further relationships within your community and beyond your community of faith. And so great to hear that. We'll now turn towards Claire, Claire, your church really exemplified how a creation justice ethic can infuse the life of a congregation so that it becomes manifest as part of an ongoing central part of your DNA as a church. Can you tell us something about how you experienced this?
Thank you, Brooke. I want to say to everyone who's watching this that we are grateful for you being with us. And I hope to be brief. I am a layperson, so I am going to give you a short version of what it means to keep that mission going. You've heard some wonderful stories from some very helpful people who've led their churches and congregations into the process and became Creation Justice churches and have continued the work. We at Lakewood United Church of Christ in St. Petersburg, Florida, started and finished the process becoming a church in 2019 for Creation Justice. And I was part of the leadership group that made that happen, along with Reverend Kim Wells, who may be on this webinar. So hi, Kim. And she and her work were immense in supporting what we ended up doing. Our mission at our church actually includes the statement to work for God's peace and justice throughout creation. And every Sunday, that's part of what we say in our mission statement. So we are reminded over and over again, as we need to be, that this is something that we stand for and want to move forward on. I have to say that there is an urgency to this work So if you're on the front end of this and overwhelmed by, well, all these churches have done so much, how could we ever do that? Let me tell you that Lakewood United Church of Christ is the little church that could. We have a very small congregation. I'm not even sure what the membership is now, 50, maybe 60. And we've always been, in recent years, small, but resilient. And even through COVID, like many of you, we have survived and thrived. So if you're new to this and you're thinking, we don't have the people, we don't have the leadership, we don't have the resources, I'm here to close the deal and say, yes, you do, and you can do this. And I want to say there are a few points I'll make. One, to recognize and develop leadership. Well, who's going to do this? Well, we had Pastor Kim Wells and myself and a few others, a very small group of people, got together and said, we want to do this. We think we can pursue this. You have these people. You have people who are outdoors types. They're campers, hikers, boaters, bicyclists. They love the outdoors. You have recyclers, and you have people who do gardening and permaculture, and those who are artists and create beautiful things out of the natural world, or paint the natural world, or draw it. You have teachers and scientists who research and teach and educate others about the environment. You have people who are probably in social work and social justice work, who will care deeply about the effects of the environmental degradation on the poor and disadvantaged in your communities. So you have what you need to start this process. You just have to identify and talk to some folks. How do you inspire interest? We've heard a lot of things. We inspired interest many ways, by discussion, by bringing people together outside and having outdoor activities, by having films and guiding people toward environmental films and discussion, by reading and talking about Cathedrals on Fire that Brooks wrote and really inspired us, by getting speakers from the community to come in and talk to us, by signing petitions for environmental issues at the local, state, regional, national level, and by focusing our church services around the environment and using music and scripture and inspiration that really made a difference in our thinking. So we have to be inspired. All the talking in the world won't do it. You've got to get the heart involved. And that's part of what we do to move forward. Then you really, and here you've gotten all these people who've said, we did it, we reached out, others shared with us, we shared with them. You don't have to do it alone. You have help. You have help at the national office, state, and local levels. There's lots of people who want to reach out and help you become a Creation Justice Church and start on the pathway. So take advantage of the resources. We really would love to help you. And finally, do it now. Don't wait. We are in climate crisis. We are in pollution crisis. We are in a lot of crises that we need our help in the faith communities to resolve. And your church, no matter how large, how small, can make a difference. So we were fortunate at Lakewood to be able to do a few things similar to what you've already heard. I will name a few things that are actually going to be in the resources you will receive as a follow-up to this webinar on the annual reports that I helped to write that will show you all the things that we're capable of doing even as a small church. One of the things I would say that I've heard from others is get outdoors. I don't care what the weather is. If you can find a way to be outdoors with your congregation. We had a weekly labyrinth walk outside. We had service under the trees, particularly during COVID. We had campfires, which we had a fire pit and enjoyed for the solstice and World Earth Day and New Year's Eve and a lot of occasions. We had a permaculture class using our grounds to learn how to do permaculture gardening. So getting out together, and there's many ways of doing it, can build energy and enthusiasm and love for the outside. Arts and music. We had a drum circle outside. We went to see a performance of Haydn's Creation in celebration of our reaching the status of Creation Justice Church The Florida Orchestra was performing it a couple years ago, and that was a wonderful way to celebrate with music. The choir director and the pastor frequently choose hymns and anthems that have a environmental, outdoor, love of creation theme. So music and art, very important. Social justice, constantly we're working on Black Lives Matter. We had demonstrations for over a year at our church out front every Sunday night. And we support many initiatives in the local community on social justice issues. And we try to think in terms of these people needing more support always because of the environmental stresses that they have to endure. Finally, I'll say, how do you publicly relay your love of creation and your care for creation? If somebody walks by your church, how would they know? Is it only the people that come inside? Well, we ended up putting in an EV charging station. We are looking into a grant for solar panels. We haven't done it yet, but we've been talking about it, working on it for quite a while. And my final story is about the cross, the great symbol of Christianity, interpreted in many ways by different faiths. We had a huge white cross out in front of our church. It started to fall apart. It was old. It was getting deteriorated from inside. And it was dangerous because one of the arms fell off. So the cross was literally deteriorating on our front lawn. So we had to pull it down. I actually helped a group pull it down, and we chopped the base of it down with an axe. It felt very, very symbolic. I'm not sure how. And the question now is, what are they going to put in its place? Is it going to be another cross? Is it going to be a tree, a fountain, a garden? Is it going to celebrate the natural world of God's creation? That's the question the church is facing and will hopefully resolve soon. I think, though, what we're trying to say is we want to express our love and care of creation in every way possible. We want to believe we can do it. We want to pull people together to start this process. And I want to say, you can do it. And please do it soon, do it now. Don't wait. The earth and all her species need us to act together. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Brooks.
Thank you so much, Claire. That was terrific. All four of you were very inspiring, and I'm really grateful to each of you. This has been really a jam-packed hour, and we're coming close to the end of it. Unfortunately, all good things must come to an end. And what I want to kind of assure our audience about two things before we wrap up. First, I want to kind of echo Claire's go get 'em spirit and really just encourage you that the most important thing is to get started, that this isn't about perfection. If you don't say to yourself, oh, but we can't get a heat pump, and we aren't going to be energy efficient until we get that heat pump. It's not about being perfect. It's about starting the journey and being on the journey. So the most important thing is to get started. And so, this is a program that will embrace you wherever you're at. And we want to encourage you and support you in that. And, if there were questions that today's webinar raised for you, answers you need, please do contact me. I always really encourage churches that as they get started, have a conversation with me, and we can kind of talk through any issues you might be having. And as you can tell, there's a wealth of experience out there in the UCC of churches that have been through this process. So there are answers out there if you've got questions, and I can be a connector and help you figure things out. So please do reach out to me. This has been a wonderful time. I just kind of want to end on a note of gratitude. When we talk about environmental issues, it's often, it can be a source of despair at times, but look at all these wonderful resources we have here. Look at this community that's gathered here, and we do have so much to be thankful for. So let me end now with a benediction. With gratitude for the gifts of creation, with gratitude for the undying heartbeat of justice that is divine, with gratitude for this community that has gathered here today, let us go forth from this moment encouraged, renewed and inspired by God's presence in this world. Amen.
Siblings in Christ, if you were moved by this conversation, if what's been offered here has helped enhance your ministry or has nurtured your soul for the journey, please consider donating to the annual fund of the United Church of Christ by texting UCC to 41444. Your support will help to provide programs like this, which are an essential part of our ministries in the United Church of Christ. Thank you for your support. Be blessed on your journey and know that you are not alone. We are holding you in prayer. Amen.